So, last week, as some of you might remember, I had heavily foreshadowed that I was going to watch the latest film by Wes Anderson, Isle of Dogs.
And what did you think of his latest outing?
I didn't like it.
Ooh.
I honestly was very disappointed by it for a whole slew and variety of reasons that require so many explanations that might as well be the entire podcast at this rate. But first, before I get down and dirty to my thoughts about Isle of Dogs, which, by the way, I think it's one of his weaker films, again, for many reasons, I would like to hear the opinion of a novice. Yes, what did you think of Isle of Dogs?
Well, the only one that I can really just sort of remember because I've really only seen his animated library of it, which is basically just Fantastic Mr. Fox and this movie. And I
These
really like
are
that.
the only two animated films he's ever done.
Yeah, just remembering back on Fantastic Mr. Fox, I really remembered it for its very dry sense of direction. Like most of the characters didn't really go very high in octave, and its animation styling and stop motion was very unique for it. Unlike a lot of other ones like Laika and such, which has a lot of more like vibrant, free-flowing animation, it was a lot more stiff. And like you said, there's a lot more symmetrical staging of everything, which made all the movement really cool. So that's what I really liked about Fantastic Mr. Fox, and that animation styling made its way into Isle of Dogs. It's definitely a very stylistic movie in a sense. I can see why this didn't go directly into general audience territory. It just didn't feel like something that would be easily digestible in a sense. It felt very slow, even more so than Wes Anderson's last movie, which definitely made it more boring. Because I watched this with my boyfriend, and he was falling asleep during it.
Well,
Like,
first of all, you are both uncultured swines for saying that, but regardless, I really
oh,
like
thanks for
the.
that.
Okay, insulting you aside, honestly, the humor is the least of the film's problems, and I'm coming into this again with my own perspective, which is the perspective of somebody who has always sort of been fascinated by Wes Anderson's style, both his emphasis on the artifice of cinema and the alienation aspect of it, and the more or less subtle commentary on human nature is definitely much better with live action than stop motion animation because, well, he has more experience with that. But that's a problem in its own right. While I think that stop motion lends itself relatively well for his own unique style, which again, it's all about putting a giant spotlight on the fake nature of the medium, of the digests, which with those very uncanny characters models and miniaturized settings, said style feels empowered. However, I have to say this, and I cannot believe I, of all people, am saying this. His style is much better for live action. Well, actually, no, that's not true. What I meant to say is that his style is far more impressive and powerful with live action rather than animation because yes, everything about Isle of Dogs and Fantastic Mr. Fox is meticulously put together, meticulously detailed and animated. Even the very stilted movement and the motion and overall nature of the characters and how they interact with the environment. It works really well with a style that's, by the very definition of its own nature, supposed to be stilted in some way or the other. If you see a film by the Aardman Studios, they seem to be actively going against the limits of the medium of stop motion animation to be as fluid and animated as possible, whereas with Wes Anderson is embracing the limits of the medium to comment on the limits of the medium. Which is fine in its own right, but again, this is all far more impressive and far more interesting with the live action. And I am saying this merely and purely from an audience standpoint. Because it's one thing to see puppets on screen acting and moving like puppets, and then seeing actual human beings, human actors on screen in big fake sets, acting and moving like puppets.
Correct.
It is far more interesting and impressive, and it is far more powerful with whatever message of alienation and metatextual analysis that Wes Anderson is going for with each and every one of his very heavily stylized films. Stylized, in fact, to the point of porpoise self-parody. Cinéma d'auteur, if you will. I'm bringing back that pretentious term to give you an idea. So I enjoy his films because they are both a proper film d'auteur, but at the same time they are making fun of the entire tradition of authorianism. And they're all great in that sense. Unfortunately, again, that doesn't work quite as well with stop motion, because again, you are seeing fake entities that you know are fake, acting like they are fake. Whereas with the human actors in his live-action films, you are seeing real people acting like they are puppets, fake puppets. So when they actually escape from the stiltedness to deliver a moment of emotional sincerity, that feels 10 times more strong and powerful. Whereas in the cartoon, in the stop-motion animated cartoon like Isle of Dogs, as good as those characters are and as sincere as they get towards the end, their appearance and their not being real people works against them slightly. So this is one of the few cases in which live action is better than animation when it concerns a very specific style, in my opinion.
In my sort of case, like the way that I took the emotional aspect of the movie is that with the dry style of Wes Anderson's like animated films from Fantastic Mr. Fox and this one, definitely the dryness of the dialogue is just sort of like straight throughout both films. But definitely in Isle of Dogs, that sort of worked more against it because it's such a much more bigger story with like multi-classism, like the Isle of Dogs and all that sort of stuff. And you basically go towards the ending where they have like these big moments with the son and father having to come together all, and it just becomes sort of a movie where it's trying to have a heart to it, but it doesn't really beat deep down. I know that sounds overly pretentious to put it like that, but
you have a point there, because honestly that third act had a bit too much meat on the grill, so to speak. And it was rushing towards a conclusion when it had a lot of threads dangling to reach, so to speak. So it didn't quite feel as emotionally satisfying as a more typical Wes Anderson film would tend to be, in its own unique and understated way. I really appreciate, by the way, the understated acting in this film. One of the many reasons I like to compare him to Jean Renoir is that Jean Renoir used to have his actors trying to act as if they were reading the phone book, to try and rid them of whatever they might have learned in acting school, and trying to get out the sincerity of the performance in order to be as authentic as possible. And Wes Anderson, in my opinion, succeeds in doing just that once again. He knocks it out of the park. In fact, my favorite scene in that film was that first interaction between Chief and the show dog.
Yeah.
Which pains me because it doesn't really amount to anything significant within the rest of the film. They just meet each other again in the epilogue and they are suddenly together, and it doesn't really have any substance to it, sadly.
Yeah, that's sort of what really just sort of annoyed me about the film, because it has all these like really nice things. Like the one thing that's just sort of almost pissed me off in a sense, like the girl character and the boy character. Well, at the end, the boy character has a crush on the girl character that got just tacked on in there.
Yes, I am deeply unsatisfied by the way Anderson handles the characters in this film for the most part. Because if this were to be just about the dogs in the aisle and wouldn't cut away to the humans every once in a while to drive whatever larger plot forward, this would have been a much more focused and much more enjoyable film. Instead, we had to cut out again to the humans in the mainland and see whatever they're doing, and we are only allowed to connect with one of them because of this particular choice that the director made, which I'm going to address in a minute. But it's a big problem, and so there is that.
I want to compare it to Fantastic Mr. Fox real quick, because that's a much more focused story on like Mr. Fox and his way to basically get over on the farmers and such. Like, it's a much more focused tale. While here we have the dogs with the humans on the aisle, and they're basically both stories just sort of clashing together because you get one over on top of the other. And just like you said, it just leads to the points where just like, oh, the boy likes the girl now. We didn't set that up.
I guess that happened.
Oh, yeah, the chief and the show dog, they're together now. Oh, you know, that dog that we're looking for, like he's got a wife now, and they have puppies now.
They are venerated as gods because Japan and his wacky shrines and his wacky traditions. I'm going to get to that right now because it's a big problem with this film. Right. So, you might have heard that people had systematically called out Wes Anderson for his, shall we say, less than amiable portrayal of Japanese culture in the film, which I understand the intent behind it, but still, in the execution, it looks like he's ridiculing a other culture, as it were.
Yeah, I can definitely see how it comes across as that.
But here's the deal. Here's the bigger problem, which comes with the burden of my own perspective towards this director. Because if you happen to be a casual viewer that doesn't know anything about Anderson's previous works and happen across this film, you might just feel a bit taken aback by seeing a character that literally looks like Yellow Kid, for example, or seeing all those really awkward sets and situations that are clearly meant to portray Japanese culture in a somewhat comical but also alienating manner that you are clearly not supposed to connect with as a Western, non-Japanese speaking member of the audience. But again, if you if you know this director and you know his other films, then it makes it much, much worse. And I'm going to explain this to you because I mentioned earlier about alienation, right? Is a way in which he portrays humanity in a overly stilted, fake and alienating manner to comment about human condition or human society, and to create a disconnect between certain situations in the film and the audience, letting the audience actually connect far better with very specific characters that the director wants us to emotionally connect with, which is all well and good in theory, but it becomes a problem when he is using a culture that's not his own for that purpose. He's essentially throwing Japanese culture and its tradition under the alienation bus, so to speak, for the sake of doing the same thing he's been doing with all of his films. We are clearly supposed to connect with the English-speaking characters, mainly the dogs, and that one useless girl from Cincinnati, Ohio in the mainland. But at the same time, we are not allowed to connect with any of the Japanese-speaking characters because there are no subtitles, because it's a stylistic choice that the director wanted to push in this. But it's actually detrimental to our immersion in the film, and worse yet, it's actually detrimental to the plot progression, because there are many scenes in which we are clearly supposed to follow whatever these characters are saying, but we can't because we don't speak Japanese, unless we do, clearly. But that's not the case for most of the people for which this film was intended towards. And again, it wouldn't be that much of a problem if the film was more focused in telling just the story of the dogs and the boy on the Isle of Dogs. But again, it keeps cutting away from that focus to move a larger plot in the background. And that's where it really doesn't work, this choice.
Right.
Especially since the only character that we are allowed, again, to connect with is not a Japanese character, is this white girl that happened to be a foreign exchange student. We are only allowed to connect with her and not with any of the other more potentially interesting characters that are speaking Japanese.
Like,
this boggles the mind.
Like, if you compare both sections of the movie, the one with the humans on the mainland and on the Dog Isle, like, you have the Japanese boy, and he's saying everything in Japanese and no one can really understand him, but you can clearly see his emotion and how he just basically moves and acts, and you see, like, yeah, I totally get what he's saying and all that.
Yes.
But then on the mainland, everyone's speaking like it's all expositional dialogue that you can't understand.
I think it's clear that we are supposed to find comical the fact that they are speaking a language that's not our own. Because, ha 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 ha, don't they sound funny with how emphatic each and every one of their words are?
Like, I
Again!
found it funny when the boy was doing it, because he was just a hyperactive little boy. I didn't find any humor on the mainland and all that when all the other Japanese characters were talking.
Well, you know,
Like,
there was this creepy Japanese lurch kind of butler character, and it's pretty obvious that when he is speaking, we are supposed to find it amusing because, oh, he seems angry, isn't that funny?
Yeah.
Yes, this film has a lot of problems, most of which come from misguided decisions and even more misguided executions.
Animation-wise, it's a beautiful movie altogether. Like, the only parts that I really liked were on the Isle of Dogs. Everything else just sort of, like, glosses over, in a sense.
Yes, the film pretty much loses me every time it cuts to whatever the humans are doing, and again, this is the kind of film that needed to have much more focus and needed to have a much simpler story in order to work. But Wes Anderson tried to go basically outside of his comfort zone and tell a much more ambitious story than he usually does. His stories are usually much more small in scale, and that, again, allows for the characters in said stories to have a much more intimate connection with the audience. That's not distracted by whatever madness is going on somewhere else that you don't care about.
Yeah, like, if you really think about it, on the Isle of Dogs, what do we know? Do we know really anything about the other 4 dogs that are along with Chief?
That's a good point. Well, we all know that they are played by really talented actors and they're all funny in their own way. But really, the only dog that gets any real development is Chief. And
Yeah,
his
so
relationship with the boy eventually gets really, really cute. It's basically the emotional core of the film. And then the boy becomes the mayor at the end because...
and get the kid government. Yeah, that whole society won't break down after like a week.
Let us not speak about governments ever again. So yes, I love dogs. If you're not already an appreciator, a connoisseur of Wes Anderson, you might find it problematic. If you happen already to be a connoisseur and a fan of Wes Anderson, you might find it very problematic. There is no escaping from these problems that it has.
Yeah, unfortunately so.
But
Yeah,
let's
just
look
like
at the positives instead. We've had two, not one, two stop-motion animated films released in theaters in basically a month.
yeah,
That's
huzzah.
that's almost
Yeah,
completely unheard of.
yeah, really. And Isle of Dogs did fairly well, if I am remembering correctly.
Well, Wes Anderson has always done pretty well for himself. After all, he keeps making films. So there is that. There is definitely an audience for his dry, alienating humor.
So we just have to hope for the future where he goes back to a much more focused, simpler story
Yes, I mean,
along with his work.
Wes Anderson is not the kind of director you should be binge watching because after a while all of his films seem to be too similar to each other. You could say he is obsessed with a very specific stylistic direction. In that sense, Isle of Dogs tried to be a little bit more ambitious than usual, but it did not work out for the best, mainly
Yeah.
for all the reasons we've already explained. But, you know, seeing one of his films once every couple of years is still an experience. Now, he really needs to do something about this trend of his, specifically how he tends to portray minorities or different cultures, because I think he might have the best intentions, at least in what he wants to tell, but he needs to be wary about what he chooses as a tool for his own sets of values and commentary and whatnot. Just a little bit more careful next time. Maybe this might have been a lot better if instead of accidentally mocking the culture of an entire country, he would have gone and created a completely different country out of the blue with a made-up language. Also, no more characters that look like Yellow Kid. There was this Acker character, the one that basically single-handedly saves the day, the one you saw 3 times at best in the entire film, and he looked like the most stereotypical yellow face imaginable. Yeesh.
Yeah, that is. I remember him now. Yeah, that was very awkward to see, and I was just
Awkward
thinking, just
indeed.
like, why are we focusing on this character just sort of pointless? to the
Because he's a
story?
Deus Ex Machina, that's why.
Yeah, because the boy can't save the day on his own, the dogs can't save the day on their own. You just need some other kid to do it.
In conclusion, I like Wes Anderson's postmodern fairy tales. Do better next time. Okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Must be the season of the witch. Must be the season of the witch. Oh, must be the season of the witch.